Hi, this is Carrie, and in this video I'm going to talk about using layers in iScrapbook scrapbooking software. It doesn't seem real obvious in iScrapbook, but there is a way to work with layers. There are two layers by default in iScrapbook, appropriately called the foreground and the background. And if you notice at the bottom of the iScrapbook window down here, near your horizontal scroll bar, you'll notice the word foreground. If you drop that down or up, you notice there's foreground and background. If you click on background, your foreground disappears and all you see is the background of your page. And this is where you've dropped your background papers. If you click back on foreground, you'll see the foreground again. And if you notice down here in this little box, there's an Edit Layers option. And if you click on Edit Layers, you'll get a little pop-up box. I kind of put it off to the side over here. But you can add more layers in here by using the plus button. You can just use the plus button. It'll ask you to give the layer a name and click OK. And then it adds a new layer. Now, the layers are in the order listed in this box. You have your background on the bottom and then your foreground, and now our new layer is on the top. So if I add something, and it's highlighted so it's selected, so if I add something to this new layer, it will be in that new layer. Add this pink bow here, and it comes in that layer. And that's the only thing in that layer. Now, if I select on foreground, if I click foreground so it's highlighted, I can't select this pink ribbon anymore. It won't let me select it. I can select my photo frame over here, I can select my butterfly over here because they're on the foreground layer, but I can't select my pink ribbon unless I click on new layer over here. And then I can select my pink ribbon, but I can't select any of my other stuff that's on my foreground layer. The other way to create a new layer would be to, let's go to our foreground here, select our butterfly and our ribbon, and use this little gear drop-down box over here on your layers window and say new layer with selection. So what it'll do is it will create a new layer, and I'm going to say butterfly and ribbon, and it will create a new layer with my butterfly and my ribbon on it. Now you notice that layer is above my foreground layer, so my ribbon popped up to above my picture, which is not where I want it. So I could just drag this layer in this window over here down so it's below the foreground, and now it will be underneath my picture again where it belongs. You can delete layers as well. If I want to get rid of this new layer here, I can just click the delete button and it gets rid of that new layer, and now my pink ribbon is gone. Now, I generally find that the standard foreground layer and background layer are plenty in iScrapbook to work with, and it took a while to get used to it because I was used to programs like Photoshop Elements or SBC Studio that when you pull an element into those programs, it automatically is on its own new layer. Each element is on its own layer in those programs, and you can reorder things by dragging them in the list to bring them forward or move them backward so they're layered properly. In iScrapbook, the way you do this is using the forward and backward buttons up here in the, let's see, the forward and backward buttons up here in the toolbar, or dropping down your Smart Inspector and saying arrange and using the arrange buttons here to move them up or down within the layer. And I generally find that really it is not a problem to just work with a foreground layer and a background layer in iScrapbook. And what I'm going to do is, to get me back to just two layers here, I'm going to say merge down, and that will merge that butterfly and ribbon layer down to the layer below it, and I will have just a foreground again. The time when creating multiple layers comes in handy is if there is, for example, you want to make a page template where you're going to have all your pages look exactly like this, and you're only going to switch out the photos, and so you only want the top layer to really be active. And so you might create a layer that has the background paper, and then you would create a layer that has your embellishments on it, and then you would create a layer that simply has the foreground stuff that you want to switch out on it. The other instance where it comes in handy is if you want to put an overlay. You might create a new layer and call it overlays. And put it between the background and the foreground layer. And then in that layer, you can come over here and select overlay. I can find overlay in my list. And you could drag it. I know there are overlays in here, or like a stamp or something that you want to have. Just use that as a, and now that is on its own layer above the background but behind the foreground. And if I turn it off, I won't see it. I use these check marks to turn off the different layers. You can't really turn off the background layer. You can uncheck it, but it doesn't disappear. And so overlays are the other instance where it's kind of handy to use a separate layer, because then they're back there by themselves and you're not accidentally clicking on them all the time and moving them around and whatnot. So most of the time, just using the standard default foreground and background layers work, but this is how you can create additional layers if you need to separate elements out into different layers. I find it tends to be more of a trouble than just using a simple foreground layer for everything, because again, in order to be able to select elements, your layer the layer they're in has to be highlighted over here or selected down here in the drop-down box. And so there's a lot of switching that has to go on. But that is how you can use different layers within iScrapbook.